Statistics, and I've had the honor of co-chairing the Climate Study Committee with Jean Arnold for the last year and a half. The committee has been composed of over 50 faculty, staff, and students, and we've been a hard-working crew under the guidance of Sue. Anyway, I want to formally introduce Sue, so bear with me as I read some text here. So Dr. Sue Rankin, she's a senior research associate in the Center for the Study of Higher Education and an associate professor of education in the College of Student Affairs program at Penn State University. Dr. Rankin has presented and published widely on the impact of sexism, racism, and heterosexism in the academy and in intercollegiate athletics. Dr. Rankin's current research focuses on the assessment of institutional climate and providing program planners and policymakers with recommended strategies to improve the campus climate for underserved communities. Dr. Rankin has collaborated with over 90 organizations in implementing assessments and developing action plans. In her advocacy work, Dr. Rankin is a founding member of the Consortium of Higher Education LGBT Resource Professionals and the statewide Pennsylvania Rights Coalition. Dr. Rankin is the recipient of the ACPA 2008 Voice of Inclusion Medallion, the award that recognizes individuals who embody the student affairs values of social justice. So basically what this boils down to is that if you go do a Google search and type in University Climate Studies, a name that's going to percolate to the top over and over again is Dr. Sue Rankin. And that's how we found her a little over a year and a half ago when we were getting ready to launch the next University Climate Study. And so immediately after talking to Sue for just a matter of minutes, I knew that she was the right person for what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go. And she's been a great guide in terms of keeping us on task and providing us the necessary guidance. And so she's been a true pleasure to work with. And I was excited that we asked, Dr. Rankin only takes on 5 universities every year. And we got the coveted 5th spot. So I was pretty pumped when we were able to secure that. And she's been a joy to work with. And I'm excited for you to hear about the findings that she has. Again, this is the preliminary findings of what's going to be a much longer process, but she certainly is providing us a great foundation in which to build and go deeper with subsequent analysis. But with that, I'll turn over to Dr. Rankin.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate it, as always. Well, good afternoon, and it's a very sparse audience, so I'm going to ask if you would to maybe either move to the center of where you are or kind of move up. It's like church, you all sit in the back, right? So it's much more intimate to have a conversation with us a little closer. So I'm sorry to make you move, you're already kind of settled in, but I appreciate you doing that. So as Neil said, Sue Rankin, I have my real job is I work at Penn State, as Neil mentioned. I've been at Penn State for 36 years. The first 17 I spent as a softball coach and a physiology professor. That was my background. Way back then, you had to have a tenure position in the college in order to coach softball. So it doesn't happen in Division I anymore like that, unfortunately. I'm from Brooklyn originally. I talk really fast. The more passionate I get, the faster I talk. So just ask Erin to interpret for you. She'll be able to figure it out for you. But I'm going to ask also, we were lucky to have an interpreter. I want to thank you for coming and being supportive for us. And I will say that's one thing about climate. It wasn't that someone requested an interpreter, but one assumed at Grand Valley that we should have an interpreter. So I think that speaks a lot for your climate. So we're going to talk again about this. The PowerPoint, the full report, and the current executive summary are all on the GVSU website. You can go to the home page. Oh yeah, will be. The full report and the PowerPoint will be next week. But if you go to the home page, you'll see an icon, a little arch. Click on that arch and be able to get to all the information about the project. So I'm pleased to be here. Thank you very much. And I know you're very busy and it was raining. I appreciate you making the trek for the rain to come. So how many students? You have a couple students in the audience? Okay, that's good. Faculty? Someone speaking to you and staff? Okay, so I got a mix. Good. And I know student Senate's going to make their way over after their 4:30, I think, during their meeting. So, so we're going to talk a little bit about the context of what it is that we did, the work that I do. So I see climate as a three-pronged kind of cog wheel, that the reason that we exist in higher education is to support students, right? So our main reason for being is to create and distribute knowledge. That's why we're here. But I believe also that happens in the curriculum and the co-curriculum. And so that's why it's important for us not just as faculty, but also as staff. Because in both cases, we support student learning and development. I also think that we are influenced by a number of different outside factors. So faculty, staff, and students make up the community, but so do alumni, so do other external forces like boards of trustees, perhaps legislatures in some cases make some laws that may in fact influence how in fact you do your work on campus. So I know in Kansas recently they actually had a legislative edict about what they could and couldn't have in the curriculum. So interesting kinds of things happening. For those who are faculty and students, underneath each of these I provide for you references. So if you're interested in some of the references, please let me know. I'll get you the PDF file. I have all those. So we see climate as a construct. As I said, I was a physiology professor for 17 years. And in my work, I measured bone density. My area was postmenopausal women, right? So I'm now my own subject. But to measure bone density, it's a very specific measurement of bone density with potentiometer, and you can tell how much to the nth degree, with a great degree of confidence as to how much that bone density might change, so I do an intervention. And so I can measure those pretty specifically. With climate, we can't do that. When I went from science to social behavioral science, I was like, well, how do I measure this? Well, they're like, I don't know. So we take a lot of questions to try and get this thing called climate, which is very amorphous. It changes like on a daily basis. We also look at it as a definition of how people behave with each other on campus, how they perceive it to be for other people, what GVSU is doing or not doing to address those issues. And those are the three factors that came out of my original factor analysis in the national study I did in 1999. And that study was 30 campuses. We looked at climate on those 30 campuses and analyzed the data and had these three factors. Interestingly, we also did a qualitative review of the comments as well from that same study and found they paralleled each other pretty closely. The themes and the factors were parallel, which is a pretty positive kind of way to do a mixed method. Bless you. Students, since we're here for students, I put up one slide that talks about how this climate impacts or influences students. For me, the most important thing is student learning and student development, and we find that climate, in fact, does have an increasingly influential impact on student learning and student development. The others, Patrick Terenzini and Pasquarello, if you know those names, if you're in student affairs, you would know those names. They do a lot of work around this. The second is that if we have a discriminatory environment, that it negatively impacts student learning. And third, research is pretty clear about having a diverse faculty, staff, and student body influences student learning in a positive direction. So homogeneous classrooms, you don't learn as much as if you're in a more heterogeneous classroom. And we think of this diversity piece I talk about, you think diversity, I don't use the word diversity anymore. I actually use equity and community. Because in fact, diversity connotates one thing in someone's mind, which might be race in the United States. Not just about race, but about African American versus white. Not about Asian, not about Native American, not about Latino. So it's important for us to think about this in the way we look at climate is overall kinds of things, not just things you think of as being diversity or equity. So faculty, staff, student interactions. Curricular integration, all of those things are also in regards to climate. I'm a teacher, I have objectives and I have outcomes, right? So the objectives of this project were not to work in a vacuum and not to be a parallel process. So in higher education, in my other role, when I left coaching and teaching, I went to the administration. I went to the dark side for a little while. And what I found in administration was that we collect lots and lots of data and put it on a shelf. Or we collect data and you make a lovely team of people to work on the data analysis and you put that lovely plan you make on a shelf, right? This is action-oriented research. What I do is action research. So we need to have things thought about in the beginning about what we want to do at the end before we even start. The committee, which was wonderful, 50 people around, right? About 50? Met every 2 weeks for a year and a half, from 8 to 9 in the morning, often. And that committee, if you're here, raise your hand, just so folks can know that you're a part of this group that did the work, so thank you. And that group helped to create this, this survey. We did it with the intention of using data you've already collected. So looking at some of the things you've already done. So Neil and Jean sent me tons of information about things you've already done to make sure that we weren't reinventing the wheel. right? So we're not being parallel, we're being integrated, okay? So we're trying to do this in a way that builds on things you've already completed. It's also something that we're doing that's not outside of what you said you want to do at Grand Valley. So your vision, your mission statement, your goals, the things that maybe you don't usually see because they are on a shelf someplace, the things that your intentions, the things you want to do, this climate survey actually is intentionally done to actually support those things you say are your goals and your visions. So there are 3 phases of the project. The first was developing the assessment tool, which we did over a year and a half. I don't have a survey template, which means I don't have a survey that every school that I work with, yes, I've done about 120 of these now across the country, so I've got a pretty good database in my head of what things are happening across the country. So we create the survey based upon what it is that you say it is we need to look at, using some of my 220 some odd questions that I have in a data pool that we could choose from to start with, already valid and reliable. So if you want to choose to use those, you could. But all of them are more technically fitting to Grand Valley. Data analysis we did, and then third, obviously, is I'm here to report out. I will say I met with, this is my, what, 8th meeting today? I lost track. So I'm a little tongue-tied, but the first meeting was with the cabinet. So the president and the cabinet are seeing this information the same day that you are. They didn't have any preliminary look at this stuff to say, okay, take this out, take that out, right? So I haven't been bought off by the administration to print the good stuff. This is really what we found. So I want to make sure that you're very clear this is a very transparent process. I know it's been done before here, and some of the feedback was that there wasn't this same kind of transparency in that first project, and so we're trying to be more transparent here. Instrument 106 questions, very long survey, but you didn't all get 106 questions, right? When you fill the first question out in the survey was by position, and then based on that, you got directed to certain questions. So some student questions faculty and staff didn't see about residence hall life and things like that. So there are some questions perhaps that you're not aware of that you'll see in the results. You know, well, I never saw that question. Well, that's because you weren't a student. There's a population study, so it was census. My colleagues who are doing this work are saying that I'm crazy, you don't do census studies. But what I don't do, if I do a random sample, what happens? That's not rhetorical. If I did a random sample at GVSU, what would I find? No light bulbs? Need more coffee? We would find that we missed everybody who's different, because you're a very homogeneous population here, pretty much, right? So I can't do random. So next step is randomized stratified sample, right? Which means I take the population, identify the sample based on the population, and do a survey. That makes a whole lot of sense. But what would happen would be that if, tell me your name. If Dawn got a questionnaire, a survey, she'd say, how come I don't run any surveys? If you didn't get one, you say, how come I didn't get one? I really want to talk about this stuff, right? So I was getting all these emails from people saying those kinds of things. And so I said, fine, we're just going to do a census, because we can. Results, again, include those 4 things we already talked about. Limitations, always in survey research you have limitations. Okay, the first one is self-selection bias, which means that some people could fill it out and others could not. It's voluntary. You're not like, you know, a gun to your head, please fill a survey out. We don't do that. Second is that may influence response rates. And so response rates less than 30%, we have to be really careful about generalizing to the whole population. So I'm saying that as a caution as we go through the process. You had a very good response rate, so I'll offer that up. Desirable questions. Okay, I will answer in the way that I think people think I should answer the question. Right, so some of those things might come up. A method limitation. In order to protect confidentiality, we made sure that anything less than 10 in the cell was moved to the next level. So if you were the only African-American male who's teaching engineering, okay, then we would probably have to move it up because we'd know who you were, right? So we lose some data that way, but I think we also then protect anonymity. That's more important. So, response rates. Overall, these are the student, the response rates were over 7,000 people responded to the survey. Fabulous. We're very happy about that. More importantly, over 6,000 gave their comments. 110 different people gave their responses. So we've got lots of qualitative information as well as quantitative. And while I'm saying that, Neil is the PI for this project. He has the data. And it's a really rich database that you're going to continue to use for other things. So if as you're going through the presentation, things come to you and say, that would be really interesting to know more about this. Or how would X kind of feel about that? Well, write those down and send them to Neil. Because right now, that's how we're going to do this. But the proposals will go back to Neil, and a small committee will review those, identify which ones we can do based on the IRB requirements that we have, and then move forward. Secondarily, he and Charlotte are going to be doing a means by getting this data online so you can actually do your own analysis. Right? Now think about a year, perhaps, to get that kind of information out. But it's going to be a process over the next couple of years. Student respondents, you can see they were less than we would have liked, less than 30%. When you put them all together, they're close. So we're getting close to that magic number of 30 to generalize. Staff response rates, above 30% for the most part. Faculty response rates, except for full professors and senior librarians, we had a pretty good response rate. That's pretty telling, isn't it? I see some smiles. Okay. We also had a number of semester by semester and adjunct instructor kind of faculty, so we can look at those as well as a group. So we have some good cross-section of people. Look at students of color, 16%, and women respondents, also 16%. Again, much below the 30% we're trying to shoot for, but at least you have an idea of who responded. We also have several other demographic characteristics we looked at. That many of these are not in the presentation, but they are in the full report. So if you're interested in those, you can look at the full report. You can see that big green bar, that's white. Okay, you're a predominantly white institution. The reason for the graph, though, is to show you that you have a number of people identifying in racial categories that are not in the ones that you give them on the admissions application to fill out. And you have enough in those categories to actually do a separate analysis on some of those different categories. So that's a positive thing. You're a very diverse campus, despite the fact you think you're all white, right? Unfortunately, we have to do this analysis, people of color versus white, for most of the analyses because of the small number in those categories. So when we talk about people of color, keep in mind that we're talking about all of these different categories. These are duplicated totals in this slide, which means that people can answer more than one. So we can look at biracial, multiracial, monoracial, and see differences between those as well. So there's lots of different kinds of questions you're going to be able to ask from the survey data. How am I doing, okay?
Your speed is fine, but it's echoing.
Echoing, okay. I'll try, is it echoing for you all as well? All right, just the way the acoustics. I'll try to slow down and articulate a little better. By gender, the important point in this slide is you have 24 people identifying as transgender, which is higher than I find anywhere I've been in the country, for any institution, no matter how small or large, which says to me that, in fact, they feel comfortable enough identifying who they are. That's a very positive thing. Women and men, pretty much similar across the different categories of employees. For sexual identity, you can see we have a large number of people who are identifying as LGBTQ. That's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer for this case. Questioning is off by itself. In many analyses, you see those kind of put together. I separated them out for this particular slide. The one to point out here again is that that's a very high number of people identifying as LGBTQ for a campus this size. Another positive finding. It means that people are okay identifying who they are, even though they don't have to. They could be invisible if they wish to. Right? Asexual is one we're going to try and pitch in the next survey that I do, because what people have told me after, students in particular, is they think asexual is not having sex at the time. Okay, that's not asexual. Okay, they think it's celibate. That's not what asexual means. So we'll try to make that better next time. In regards to disability status, you can see there's a number of people who have disability, but for the most part, in the sample there was no disability, pointing out that 525 offer a psychological condition who are students. And that's good information for disability services. You know, they would be able to use that information for work in their office. For spiritual affiliation, we had a laundry list of what you could choose from, probably 2 pages in a web survey. And you have one of everything. So you have Wiccan, you have agnostic, you have atheist, you have no affiliation, you have all the Christian denominations you can think of. You have all that stuff. I divided it down to no Christian, other than Christian, and no affiliation. So there are some other work you can do with spirituality. We just didn't do that in our analysis. International students, 85. All right, so we've got a pretty, according to a meeting I had earlier today, there are over 300 international students on campus. So that's, what, maybe a little over a third, a little less than a third. So possible 30% there for them to do analysis there and get some information about international students. Know that when I talk about students of color, I mean domestic students of color and not international students of color. Okay. Class standing slide is here so you can see there's a broad spectrum of students who responded. It wasn't all first year, and it wasn't all fifth year or fourth year. I will point out that one of your fifth year students has been here for 20 years, and so we need to try and get that student graduated at some point. On campus, off campus, I know that all first year students have to be on campus, so 80% of first year students stay on campus. We see that we've got a pretty good number of students who are off campus, so we can do a comparison between those two and see differences between on campus and off campus. In regards to student organization, this slide is here to show you that we have a number of students in the sample who were not involved in anything. Right, so there are students who are, in fact, come to GVSU, do their classes, and go home, or go to work, whatever they're doing. That's an important piece also because it allows us to see differences between those who are involved and those who are not. Unique to GVSU, and I'll point out the presentation where you're unique and where you're not, based on national data. But I will not compare you to another institution. Political views, a relatively new question for me. It's on survey, so I can't give you benchmarking data, but you can see that no employees identify as being far right. Don't know why. My guess is that, I think if I have some far right, they're conservative. They aren't far right. So, any demographic questions you might have? Please interrupt if you do. We also did veterans and first generation low income and a lot of other demographics I didn't put in the slide presentation. Those are all in the report. Overall, feel very happy here. 85%, 86% in the classroom climate, 76% with Department of Work Unit climate, and 86% classroom climate. Those are similar to 5 other places around the country. The unique one is the classroom climate. That's higher than I find other places. Faculty and students say classroom climate is pretty good here. That's a positive finding. So I usually say, now we're done and you can go home. But you're not, no. We want to know how the other 20% feel. Who are the ones who are not feeling comfortable? So start looking at themes now that come up in the slides, because climate, again, you can't ask one question and get climate, right? You need a number of questions. And so we're going to look at all these different questions together and see what themes start to arise. So here we find that the people who are least comfortable with the overall climate are LGBTQ and people of color, across the board. Looking at Department and Work Unit, people of color, LGBTQ, and women. Not surprising. People are going, oh yeah, I knew that. Okay, now you have data. Around classroom climate, faculty and students of color, and LGBTQ faculty and students. So start seeing a theme that starts to arise here, right? Overall satisfaction, for the most part, people are very satisfied with their jobs. I mean, I'm happy to have a job right now in this economy, but yeah, okay, we're happy to have our jobs. 61% with their career progression. And when you look at this, you'll find that there are differences between different ranks of faculty and different staff representations. And that's in the report, just not in the presentation. Least satisfied, people of color, LGBTQ. Least satisfied career progression, LGBTQ, people of color. And these are significant findings. Okay, we use chi-score analysis to do the data analysis. So looking at the differences between the LGBTQ and straight and people of color and white, they're significantly different. We did these on all the different demographic categories, and these are the ones that were significant. Okay? So we don't have problems in higher education, we have challenges and opportunities. So glass half full kind of person that I am, where are the challenges? 11% of people said of our sample said they experienced harassment. Any conduct that interfered with their ability to work or learn, right? That's much less than I find in all my other studies. Usually between 20 and 25%. Okay, so it's much lower. Doesn't mean it's good. Okay, normal for me is a setting on a dryer. All right, it really isn't a normal. Okay, that's what the data says is what normal might be, right? So we know from what I've done so far, that's the average between 20 and 25%. You fall below that. How you experienced it? Mostly subtly. I'm ignored, I'm stared at, I'm intimidated in some way, I feel isolated when we're working in groups. We had a whole list of things here for you to choose from. These are the top 6 that rose to the top, so I put those in there for you. But again, subtle kinds of things. Doesn't mean they aren't important, because those subtle things that happen over and over again to people start to build up. And when they build up, at some point, one little thing puts them over the edge and they blow. And you're wondering, why is this student so mad? Why are they so angry about this one little thing that happened? Well, it's not one little thing. It's like one little thing over and over and over and over and over and over again that finally makes them blow. Mostly based upon position. or where I am in the institution. So it's saying, the results are talking about the fact that if I am a student, do I experience this harassment from a student? Next slide says, no, not so much. This is a statistic's dream right here. It's almost exactly straight linear regression here. So what you see is that students who experience harassment experience it not because they're a student. But people that are EAP and COT, I'm experiencing it because I am one of those folks. But I reside in those position categories on campus. And what the qualitative analysis kinds of bring out is that staff, we have a caste system in higher education, in case you didn't know that. And staff feel totally disenfranchised in the institution. You're not unique there. They feel undervalued and underappreciated. So that hierarchy we talk about in higher education is alive and well, does exist. Around gender, women experience it most often based upon their gender identity, or being a woman. Around race, people of color experience it most often based upon their race. And those who are white here who say they experience harassment are saying it's because, oh, I'm a person who is a white man, I applied for a job, I didn't get it, somebody else got it instead of me, who happens to be a person of color. So there's a lot of reverse discrimination that was offered in the qualitative comments. LGBTQ respondents, most often I feel are being harassed based upon their identity as an LGBTQ person. In disability status, you can see the bars are much lower compared to the other slides. There is some harassment occurring, but not nearly as much. But again, information that's probably good for the Disability Services Office to use. The location, most often in a class for students, or in a campus housing for students, in a mini group of people, or on a campus job for employees. Makes sense. Where you spend most of your time. This slide is the one where I had to do the analysis a few times to make sure that it was correct. It's a very unique slide for GVSU. What it says is, who is the person who is the perpetrator of that conduct? And for faculty, usually I find within cohorts, so faculty on faculty, student on student, staff on staff. In this slide you see students are saying, no, it's faculty who are harassing students. And that's the only time I've seen that happen in all of my work. So very unique to GVSU. And lots of reasons why that might be. Okay? What do we do? There are lots of choices here for you as well. And what we found was there were a group of personal responses and a group of reporting responses. So what do you see that's kind of unique in this slide? What's it telling you? If you're there this morning, don't answer because you already know the answer. Yeah, most people aren't reporting anything, right? They're just saying, I experienced this, and I'm going to go tell my friend, and we're going to go kibitz at the cooler over lunch about how mad I am about this, right? I call it the Midwest nice thing. So what happens then is that we don't know, you say, well, administration, do something about this harassing behavior, but we don't even know what's happening because you aren't telling us. Right, so we've got to find some way that we can get this information out to actually do something about the things that are occurring. Yes?
Quick question, so can we go back? The 16% confronting the harasser, how do we stack up as far as other institutions?
That's similar. That's pretty similar. Somebody says something to me, I say to you, that's not appropriate. Right? Yeah, it's pretty similar. The big difference to take away from this slide really is that there are very few people that report anything. Thank you. So, this is the tough part of the presentation for me, sexual assault. We have a rape culture on college campuses and we aren't doing anything about it. This is not GVSU challenge, this is a national challenge that's being played out here at this campus as well. It looks 2% of the sample, I said, oh, that's pretty low, right? That's 154 people who said that they had experienced sexual assault while they'd been at GVSU. When I break it down across, this slide talks about how this goes across different demographics. Doesn't matter who you are, it occurs to you like anybody else. The group that is most affected, undergraduate women, 120. That's a huge issue. and one that I have a hard time talking about. It's my research area too, right? So what research says nationally is that sexual assault occurs in the first year, the first semester, the first 6 weeks. So if we know that and we know this, or these results, then what can we do about it? We have an action. What kind of action can we take place? I spent lunch today speaking with some people who are working on this on campus. So it's already something you already are addressing, right? But how can we do more about that? Where it occur, off campus and on campus, I actually read to the committee today where those individual places were. Okay, some of them went, when I said it, like one was, I think lots of residence halls were some of the ones that came out, parties that happen off campus, right? So a lot of those came out. Who are the offenders? Mostly other students. That makes sense because undergraduate women who are experiencing it, right? So it's not some person jumping out of a bush off campus, right? It was someone you know. And they say they don't report it, right? We had a whole list of things to choose from about reporting. You could go to a counseling center, you could go to an online center, you can go off campus and find assistance. And they wrote down their top 3. I told a friend I felt embarrassed or I felt somehow responsible. In the qualitative piece here, a lot of the students said, I didn't report it because I was drinking too. I didn't report it because he was my friend. I didn't want to get him in trouble. So what happens with people who are sexually assaulted, and this is, again, the work that we work on, is that that will haunt you for the rest of your life until you have some assistance, both personally and or professionally. Right, so how do we address this on campus? If it does occur and we know it occurs, how can we be helpful to the victim? Is that surprising to anybody? Those numbers? I'm seeing some of this. Okay. So different kind of a thing. So what about persistence? How about people who, are they staying or leaving GVSU? And if they are, who are they, right? So when you think about this, when we look at this as faculty and staff in this particular slide, they're thinking about it a lot more than students. So we offer this, take it with a grain of salt, because at Penn State, every morning I wake up and I think about leaving the institution, right? So I think employees, but students, when they come to GVSU, they don't come with the expectation they're going to leave the next day. They come expecting they're going to stay for their 4 years and graduate, right? So among employees, significant differences between around gender, around race, and sexual identity. So there are significant differences here between those 3, right? So women more than men, people of color more than white, and LGBTQ more than heterosexual. Students, gender, no difference. Women and men, pretty much the same. Not really a difference. But around race, significant again, and around LGBTQ, significant again. Not Christian, non-Christian, not veteran, non-veteran. Okay, but we looked at those as well. Okay, these are the ones that stick out. So perceptions. Now start putting this together in your head now. Okay, where are the themes that are starting to arise around climate at GVSU? So overall perceptions, 18% of people said they saw something happen that might influence one's ability to work or learn on campus. All right? This is much lower than I find other places, usually between 30 and 35%. Those are positive kinds of things happening at GVSU. Doesn't mean that they're good. We still have some things to do. I want you to walk away saying, oh, we're great, better than anybody else, we can stop, we're good, right? That's not the case. And I appreciate the choir. I mean, look around. These are the folks you probably see every place else you go to these sessions, right? Where's everybody else? I know it's raining, so. The form now is more overt, right? Because I'm seeing or hearing things. So derogatory comments are occurring, but there are still some of those subtle things happening. And racial profiling has now risen to the top of this list. It was non-existent before. People are seeing racial profiling happening. And in the qualitative piece at the end of the survey, we asked about differences between on-campus and off-campus. A lot of students offered that they felt they were being profiled off-campus much more than on-campus. I get followed in a market, you know, or driving while black in the wrong part of town, that kind of thing. And here we also find something unique to GVSU is that sexual orientation and religious spirituality now rise to the top. Unusual, actually. The first time I've seen this also happen is at GVSU. So I asked the committee, did something happen on campus in regards to sexual orientation and religion during the time the survey was up last February? And we couldn't think of anything other than the preacher was on campus. That may have caused some stir. But other than that, there wasn't. So there's something unique happening here around these two groups that people were seeing these things happening. Not people in the groups, not people who are LGBTQ or people who are non-Christian seeing things happening. Everybody was seeing things happening in regards to those two different entities. Yeah?
I know it wasn't exactly contemporaneous with the survey samples, but there has been a heightened profile of some bullying issues, kind of that we had visually back in the fall. I don't know if that you've seen it in other institutions.
It's the first one I've seen those two rise to the top. Even those who were doing it in the fall when Tyler actually went off the bridge. So again, I don't know what's happening, but it's a question for you to think about as a community, right? The source, most often students. That makes sense. There's more than anybody else on campus. And the place it happened are places you would think, right? A public place on campus, in a class, group of people, because that's where you have most of those interactions with other people. Discrimination, hiring, firing, promotion. Not unique to GVSU. These things happen across the country, and they're happening similar rates across the country. The difference is who it's happening to, right? So here we see that race is the primary basis of discriminatory hiring. Now that can go in both directions. It can mean that a person of color feels they aren't receiving a job because of their color, or it could be that a person who is white is saying somebody's getting it above me because they're going to hire quotas, right, of people of color. So there was comments going in both directions. Position was the main reason for both both promotion and for firing. So now that position piece is starting to come up, because the position here is in regards to staff. Okay, staff are seeing this happening more than faculty. Work-life, we had 3 pages of questions about work-life balance. For the most part, people are very happy with their balance of work-life here. And I'm finding that more and more in the last few years, I think because of the economy, frankly. People are just happy to have a job. Workplace, pretty welcoming for everyone, according to what we found, except for psychological conditions. So in the workplace, if you have a psychological condition, people feel that that's not a very welcoming place for you if you do. People of color, least likely to believe it was welcoming based on race and gender. So this kind of talks about some of the privileged things you might see. People who are in already marginalized populations also see it happening to other marginalized populations. The lens is a little bit broader, and it's broader because they experience it, right? And there's a lot of research that kind of points to that. Johnson, a few other people do that kind of work. People of color and LGBTQ respondents see it having an impact on the climate in the workplace for people that are not straight. So again, you see people of color noticing that, at least here, these things happening outside of their own identity category. Classroom climate, for the most part, people across all dimensions are pretty welcoming. Students of color and faculty of color found it less welcoming around race. LGBTQ faculty and students found it less welcoming around sexual orientation. Not surprising. Now again, keep in mind the themes, right? Those 2 pieces keep coming up over and over again. Position around staff, LGBTQ, and people of color. Successes, so what are some things we're doing really well? Most students said they feel very valued by faculty and by students in the classroom. Most students feel that employees at GVSU care about them in a way that values their ability to be successful. A lot of students felt that we do have discussions about difficult topics in the classroom. They don't necessarily like them, but we do have them. And that they felt they do have role models, except for students of color. Students of color felt they didn't have enough role models. And that's an important point, because if you are a faculty of color, no matter what your man, woman, doesn't matter. If you're a student of color, you're going to search that faculty member out in order to have them as a role model, which was an undue burden on that professor in order to be able to make time for students that are coming to see them who they feel they cannot say no to. So now I don't have the same, as a white professor, the same kinds of challenges put upon me as upon my other faculty of color who are in similar positions. So P&T, a little harder for me. And there's some research that bears that out. Kim Griffin does a lot of work on that. Leticia Osaguera does a lot of work on that. So you can kind of see the difficulties for faculty who are in marginalized populations of trying to achieve tenure. When they don't get tenure, it's like, oh, there's another black woman who didn't get tenure. Well, no, they didn't get tenure because they have so many other things they're trying to do in regards to service. For students who are challenged, they felt that, in fact, some faculty prejudged them based upon their identity. Students of color and LGBTQ much more than other students. And that also bears out in some of the anecdotal evidence. African-American young man walks into an engineering class. First question the prof asks him is, what sport do you play? Right? So there's a microaggression. The student already feels like, here we go again, right? Or a student comes into class and they're goth. Or they come into class and they have zillion piercings and obviously you're making assumption that they're gay, right? Tattoos, piercings, whatever it might be, right? So there's another prejudge happening. Students of color felt that the discussions around race, or in the classroom had more racial tensions than did other students. There's something happening in there when we talk about race in the classroom. So overall action, let me stop for questions. I'm doing really well. Okay, good. Curriculum was very inclusive, according to most people who responded, except for around immigrant status, military veteran status, parental status, physical characteristics, and disability status. And the important thing here is that one of the things I'm finding more and more is that military veteran keeps coming up over and over again now that we have students who are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan very different than when they left. They have a hard time integrating into the classroom. Their classmates have a hard time dealing with them. They say dealing with them in regards to how they work together in group projects and things. There's very different students. It's a great article if you get a chance to read it. It's called Killing is a Drug. It was written by a young man who wrote an essay for an English class at Baltimore County Community College. And because of that article, was dismissed from the institution. Because parents called in and said, we don't want our kids going to school. This guy thinks killing is a drug.
Sorry, what was that?
Killing is a drug. Just Google that, you'll find it. It's an interesting article we used for a justice class that I taught. So I think it's one thing that we don't think about very often, about how do we work with students who are coming back as veterans, who we don't have any training as faculty how to work with students who are veterans. The only comparison slide we could do from the 05 data that Aaron acted a dissertation on, 2011, is around whether or not we are committed at GVSU to diversity and inclusion. Look at how big that gap is between the numbers there. Improvement. That's a really positive slide. I was very happy about seeing that we can actually put that up there and show. People are actually feeling that there is some definite movement in the right direction. We're shifting the paradigm ever so slowly. Okay? We asked people to recommend to us what would make a difference for you in regards to climate. One, for this is employees, was that more mentorship for new faculty and staff. Clear and fair processes for conflict, if we have conflict. How do we go about recognizing that? More diversity education for faculty, staff, and students. That one surprised me and is also unique to GVSU. In most studies, faculty said, enough diversity training. I got it. I don't need any more. Same institution, students are saying, yeah, faculty and staff need more diversity training, right? So that's also a very positive thing because it means people are open to it. The question is, how do we deliver it in a way that meets their expectations and their time frames? You're all very busy people. How do I fit in time for my own education? Increased diversity of faculty, staff, and students, and also more support for these kinds of initiatives, right, to keep this going. So you own this data now. You own the survey. When you want to do this again, you don't need me. All right, you've got this. You can do it yourselves. So that's the point. Try and do it again. And see if, in fact, there's change between now and 2015. Right? We do it again. To see if, in fact, the interventions that you put in place to address some of the things that were coming up in this survey, that they've had an impact. And measure them metrically. When you do programs, they should be able to be assessed in a metric way. To actually see successes. That's my stat geek coming out of me, I guess. We need to be able to measure something, whether it's being successful or not. Students said, we need to have somebody to address classroom conflict. When I have a problem with a professor, this goes back to that slide we said earlier about students saying that faculty are the ones who are harassing them. If that is happening in the classroom, where does a student go to get assistance? I can't go to the faculty member. They're giving me a grade. I can't go to they say I can't go to necessarily processes because that may get back to the faculty member who's still going to give me a grade. So how to provide that safety space for students. 2, diversity training for all faculty, staff, and students. That's good. Students think so as well as faculty and staff. Greater diversity of faculty, staff, and student body. More opportunities for cross-cultural dialogue. They want to have more of that kind of difficult dialogue facilitation kind of session. Great potential best practice. University of Michigan has a wonderful curriculum called Difficult Dialogue, Intergroup Dialogue. It's a fabulous program. And it allows for facilitation of those kinds of dialogue and training facilitators to do that kind of dialogue. Because it usually ends up in people yelling at each other, which is good. That's when things actually happen, right? You can't always be nice to each other. When you have a conflict or a trigger, something pushes your button, do you sit there and kind of dwell on it, or do you actually talk about what it was that triggered you? I usually find in the Midwest that you don't say anything. I don't know why, it's a cultural thing. Okay, there's a diversity in the curriculum, have more things in the curriculum about these issues, as well as that cross-cultural dialogue. Those dialogue sessions happen very well in residence halls, captive audience, right? But many students who are in the res halls don't get it unless you put it in the curriculum. And then more mentorship. They'd like to have more effective. You do have mentorship now of students from faculty. They want more of that. Okay, take a breath. Summary. These are the things that we've already talked about, so I'm going to skim through these slides pretty quickly because we've already made these cases. But to set the context for this, because we live in a place that's a microcosm of the larger society. So we cannot say that we are not racist, we are not sexist, we are not heterosexist, ableist. We are all those things because we live in that larger society. We're not in a bubble here at GVSU. We want to think so sometimes, but I think, well, we're not. So how do we look at those things? We call them what they are. We don't make up new names to try and wash over what it is that we're actually trying to talk about. GVSU is racist, sexist, heterosexist, ableist, genders, all those things because we live in a society that is. You cannot just dismiss those things. We have to call it that. That's what I'm saying in this slide. Provide a context. So the really good things, very people have experienced harassment or observed it as compared to other studies. And people are pretty happy overall with the climate here. And people have pretty happy with the jobs, the employees with their job satisfaction. All very positive things. There are also challenges. 11% of people do experience discrimination, harassment, and 18% do see it happening on campus. So we still have a ways to go regarding some of these things that we're looking at. Again, these are less than I find in other places. That's a very positive thing. It doesn't mean that we're done. Students feel valued by faculty in the classroom. They also feel that administrators and staff are concerned with their welfare and how well they achieve success at GVSU. I would encourage or challenge you to define what you mean by academic success. If you don't know what it means, you can't measure it. So if the whole reason for being in higher education is student success, how do we measure it? I have some ideas, but I'll let you figure it out. Most employees felt it was a very welcoming workplace climate for the most part, based on all the things we talked about. That's a pretty positive thing. Some challenges, racial tension, we've already mentioned that. People of color came up over and over again. Students of color over and over again. We can't just dismiss those. Okay? Homophobia, heterosexism, again, there are issues around LGBTQ across those different pieces of climate we talked about. So we just can't dismiss those things. We need to address them. What's going on with those populations that cause them to feel the way they feel? Okay, not included, not being inclusive. How do we change that? Gender was also a thing that popped up, that there are some issues around sexism that, again, you're not isolated here. You do have the same things here that other people have, are addressing. Position. We have a caste system in higher education. You are not immune to that. Staff feel undervalued, underappreciated. And those things do come up in some of the data. The qualitative data, I would encourage you to read, if you can, the appendix, because that's where the qualitative voice comes out, which is very powerful and very supportive of some of the things we're finding in the quantitative data. So, next steps. I will turn it over to Neil or Jean, or both of you, to tag team here and talk about what you're next. Yes, question first.
Just one question. You gave us a lot of data, some overview sorts of things. Were there one or two very striking things that you haven't included in your presentation today that struck you as something else that was atypical?
one demographic that stood out. You have a large number of students who are low-income first-generation students. And I think that particular group of students, that analysis should be done to see if, in fact, there's differences between low-income first-gen. Keeping in mind that how I define low-income first-gen was based on 2 questions in the survey. The first question was your parental education status, right? But it said parent 1, guardian 1, parent 2, guardian 2, and a whole list. And anything in that column that was not college, even associate degree or attended a community college, those count as college, right? So we count first-gen as those that have no college, or parents that have no college background. The SES one's a little more difficult. We just used SES by salary per year, familial salary. And that's a really bad way, frankly, of doing SES. But in this survey, the best way to do it is to ask the students what their parents' occupation is. But that list is so long that it was impossible to do on this particular survey. So there's some limitations to the SES first gen, but in the cabinet meeting this morning, that's one of the things that we talked about, was that you do have a large number of first generation low-income kids. Interestingly, there's a question about financial hardship and being able to pay for your tuition. Those kids are the ones that are having the hardest time, and they use credit cards to pay for their tuition, which is that's an alarming big red flag for me. Because a lot of those students then come and they only stay one semester and they leave, not only with no degree, but now they have debt. So that would be striking, I think. That was different. I haven't presented that, but it is in the report. You're welcome. Other questions before I turn over to Neil and Jean? Thank you.
So next steps, this meeting that we're in right now is one of the opportunities to share the results with the community. So we had a great turnout this morning of over 100 people in a meeting. We've got another one scheduled tomorrow for CHS. So that's the sharing. And then Sue leaves us to be on our own to then do further analyses and also to come up with those action steps. So one of the things that we are going to do is to look to the Inclusion and Equity Division's advisory board. There's an advisory board made up of faculty, staff, and students. So I'm going to ask that committee to have a subgroup from that committee be this Next Steps Action Committee. And we may name ourselves something more interesting than Next Steps, but that's where we're focused. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to have this continue to be a transparent process. So we will open that committee to anyone, faculty, staff, and students at the university who wants to be a part. And that's just what we did with the climate study. So we'll put an announcement in forum, we'll put it in the landform, we'll say who wants to be, anybody who wants to be a part of it, call our division, my assistant Jessie, put your name on the list, so that when we start having our meetings, you will be notified. And don't feel, if you're interested, don't feel so you have to come to every meeting or commit to a certain number of meetings. It really will be a fluid process. So you can come in and out as your time permits, because we want to get all ideas that we can, and we'll take that for whatever time you can contribute, and you're welcome to pop in and out of that process. So I meet with the advisory board next week. We'll get that first group together, then we'll put the word out. We'll also solicit participation from the Academic Senate and from our AP and our administrative group, our COT group. So we're going to make sure we have certain key people at the table, but then anyone else who wants to be a part of it can do that. As Sue mentioned a couple of times, we probably have enough data to look at for the next several years, but we are going to start digging into it and look for those action items, those short-term things we can do in this next short period of time, as well as long-term strategies that we need to develop. So we will all have a hand in that. And as it was also mentioned, everything that you're hearing today and that the group heard this morning and tomorrow will be online sometime next week. So there's this 200-plus page report that will be there in full. The PowerPoint will be there, and the executive summary is already there. We're also, I think the tool itself, the survey, is one of the appendices in the document. So everything that we've done since last April is there for everybody to read in full. And it'll really only be if everybody does that we can then together put our heads together to come up with a plan for action steps. So I'm going to turn it over to Neil to talk about just how we're going to work this data and how we're going to get to those further analyses as we go on.
Thanks, Jean. As Sue alluded to a little earlier, the goal is within the next year or so to have a tool available on our website that's similar to what is available currently through institutional analysis, where you can actually go in and choose and pick certain variables and actually do a cross-tabulation to understand questions that might be of interest to you. And I was awarded a GA, graduate student here in Charlotte Park. She's working with me to help develop this tool. But again, be patient. It's probably going to take us a good part of this year to develop it and make sure that it's doing the kinds of things that we want to do. And in the interim, we're going to have a form that, again, will be available on our website so that if there's a question that is not in the report that you would like to have analyzed, then you would fill out the request form. This committee will look at the request form. We want to make sure, again, that we're within the guidelines that we specified in terms of the cell counts. We're maintaining confidentiality / anonymity. But assuming that we can go ahead with that analysis, then we'll prioritize the ones that we can do. And then again, it'll be over the next couple of years, we'll be trying to get a deeper understanding of what's going on in the data over what Sue has laid as a foundation for us to build on. So again, lots of opportunities down the road to answer further questions. We'll be rolling up our sleeves shortly and taking it to the next level, and we're excited to do that. So. All right. So with that, I'll ask Sue to come back up and see if there's any other questions and/or discussion that you would like to have about today's presentation.
Anything surprising?
Yeah, I'm surprised at because I was here 5 years ago when the last climate study was done, and I was happily surprised by the response of the community in terms of their commitment. And I think there are a lot of things that we've said and we've done, and yet I still feel like we have a lot further to go. So certainly the right direction, happy to see it, but certainly not something to celebrate or over-celebrate.
Yeah.
First, not just a comment. This is actually more exciting than the library. So, the other one is, I was shocked by the student involvement. Yeah, 27 students were not in the club of some sort. One follow-up question that I don't know if you would know or something to consider is, do we include housing community in the fact that they're like some housing communities that are active like meetings and activities or not, so, that identify in climate, and maybe they're not in the club.
Did we do that? I forget if we had a question that talked about clubs. I think I'd look at the survey question again. All the organizations were listed there on that slide. There are many more organizations than that. So it may be that they just weren't in that top 10 that I have up there. But I'll double check the survey.
Erin would have probably a good answer to that. Unfortunately, she said she would be really. I know that we had some discussion about how to prompt for people to think about student involvement and were you involved in something or not. And I couldn't honestly say whether that particular campus-related housing community acted or not.
Yeah.
I would say that the interesting part for me in that one is that there are students who responded who weren't involved in it. And for me, it's kind of cool as a survey researcher because I can make comparisons between those who are involved and those who aren't. Because a lot of research in student affairs points to the fact that if you are an involved student, you tend to be more successful. Right? So when we have a question on thinking about leaving the institution, right? So if I'm not an involved student, am I more likely to think about leaving the institution? There's a couple of good, interesting master theses in that data.
That came up in a lunchtime conversation as well, since this survey was administered during February last year. You couldn't even make the case that there might be new students who really hadn't had the opportunity yet. They got a full semester and all of the push that gets the campus here in Valley to energize organizations and activities.
Yeah, it was not just first years that responded, right? That
Right.
was like
That was
third and fourth year. That was, and athletics were part of that, so it's extracurricular and co-curricular kind of activities. So, but I'll look back at the survey now and ask the question and see if we included the housing.
And related to that, Chris, too, I think is that you know, we've had a growing population of transfer students that miss out on that first year experience where that gets heavily promoted to get involved. And so it'd be interesting to also kind of use that as a separating factor in terms of, you know, involvement versus not versus the transfer.
And first generation low income.
Lots
You
of ways.
don't know what is available, even though you tell me to get involved. You know, I'm too scared to go to that meeting by myself. And I've got my parents watching me involved. They have no idea, right? So it's interesting that group of students is a student group that we know from research tends not to persist. So how do we engage that population of students better?
Did we ask anything in a way? Some of them probably may not be involved if they're working. Lots
We
of
do
hours.
ask questions about how much time are you spending working beyond 20 hours a week. Beyond 10 hours a week, because 10 hours a week is federal work study, right? So if you're working beyond 10 hours a week, where are you working, how many hours are you working? There are some
So we
students
could
that
look
may
at the group
look
who
at
are
that as well.
heavily
Or involved.
Yeah, see if they're working many hours.
They compare that to financial hardship. There's a lot of ways to cross category these that would not identify anybody if you really good information.
Did we ask the question about the first time in college?
Yes, we asked the first question about students, we asked if you transfer if you were this is the first time in the institution.
Okay, so we could sort of look at that and, because we expect, or I might expect, that the first time in college would tend to be more involved. That may not be true, but I might think those people would be more likely to be involved
Less
in
involved.
clubs.
If you're looking at first generation students, you're less involved than students who are.
I would say first generation, I think that, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
first
compared to
time.
transfers and
Right.
adult students.
Yeah. It's a very unique student population here in that you have commuter, you have non-track, you have lots of first gen and a lot of track, right? So those four, we have enough data in all four of those categories to actually do some analysis on different family experience. Yeah.
You touched a little bit on the idea of what's happening with the returning veterans. Can you talk a little bit more about what you've observed over the last 4 or 5 years as you've been at different institutions doing?
Well, I worked at a veteran center, so that's where I got most of the information, and that's really that they have a very difficult time readjusting once they come back, and many don't stay. So they tend to come and go. And a lot of them don't provide services that they need, so, and most of that's counseling. A lot of PTSD, a lot of, and not necessarily that they're like, you know, having flashbacks and things like that, but it's just, they can't get through the day. Because returning back is so different than the regimen that they had when they were in the service. So that's kind of things that are, for me, interesting. And the interesting is that they get paid for all these. So nonprofit institutions or for-profit institutions are seeking out GIs because they're not part of the bill. That doesn't allow them to take money from the GIs because so it's interesting. They're getting, it's a cash cow profit. So are we seeking out veterans? Good question. The Veterans Office here helps me to our veterans. And so have they seen an influx in some of the things that they're doing? And could some of this information help for them?
You know, I can answer that a little bit, and what we're seeing is we're putting more out there in terms of supports and opportunities, and it seems that it's still difficult to get students with military background to step forward and take advantage of whether it's counseling, disability support services,
I'm not
open houses, resource fairs. It's very challenging for them to take advantage of.
And they have disabilities, student disabilities as well. They don't seek out accommodations because then they are somehow labeled as being different. Right? So a veteran, I'm cool, I can deal with this. I've been in Iraq and doing all this, I can deal with all this, and they really can't. They could use the assistance. So how to reach them, my thought is in the classroom as opposed to having them seek out the accommodations. We may be offering them. Hey, if you're a veteran, send me up class. They might not. If you have a civilian accommodation, we'll see you after class. So then you take on the as opposed to the student having to come to you. That's all. Anything else? You want to thank our interpreter, especially